In the Bible, there are instances where the writers appear to conceal certain events. Today, we'll explore the story of Reuben and Bilha, a story that raises questions about whether it involved a tragic love affair or possibly something more sinister, like rape. The story begins after Rachel's death when Jacob is an old man. According to the account, Reuben, Jacob's eldest son, had a relationship with Bilha, who was Rachel's slave and was considered one of Jacob's concubines. Many aspects of this incident remain shrouded in uncertainty. Was it an act of rape, motivated by a desire for power, or was it a result of romantic feelings? Regardless of the truth, it becomes clear why the Bible's authors chose to be discreet about this episode. Now, let's delve into the events that transpired within that tent. On one hand, it's easier to understand the relationship between Bilha and Reuben as a tragic love story. Looking at it romantically is simpler than considering it as an instance of sexual violence. On the other hand, when we examine the biblical account of a man's wife being violated, it primarily signifies the exercise of power and control. In this story, the transfer of power is symbolized by the new ruler inheriting the wives of the previous ruler, including his concubines. In this specific case, Reuben, the eldest son, aims to secure his position as the firstborn and prevent Jacob from choosing Rachel's son, his beloved wife's child. The punishment meted out to Reuben corresponds directly to his actions and intentions. He forfeits his birthright. There are other instances in which potential successors to the throne take the wives and concubines of the ruling king, thereby attempting to claim power for themselves. For instance, David marries Saul's concubines, and Absalom, who followed Ahithophel's advice to sleep with his father's wives, saying, "Go to your father's concubines." There's also the case of Adonijah, who requested to marry Abishag, the King Solomon concubine, which led to his execution by Solomon. These acts symbolize attempts at overthrowing the current ruler. Let's take a moment to talk about Leah, Rachel, Bilha, and Zilpah, who were the four wives of Jacob. These women were all Laban the Aramean's daughters. However, it's important to note that they didn't all share the same mother. Rachel and Leah were sisters and both were Laban's daughters from his main wife. On the other hand, Bilha and Zilpah had different mothers. They were born to a woman who was a slave, a lower social class, and Laban had a relationship with them as his concubine. The unusual event involving Reuben and Bilha can be found in the book of Genesis. The entire story is described in just one verse. Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilha, and Israel heard of it. Jacob had 12 sons. Genesis 35 verses 21 to 22. The verse discusses the consequences of Reuben's sin, but it doesn't specify what Reuben actually did. Instead, there's a notable absence of information. The verse doesn't provide a straightforward account of Reuben's actions, rather, it condemns his actions. The verse's unique style carries an interesting implication. In ancient times, it was customary to include an Aramaic translation when reading the Bible. The reader would recite the verse from the Bible, and then an interpreter would repeat it in Aramaic. However, there are 4 stories in the Bible that were read and not translated. This means they shouldn't be translated to prevent potential misunderstandings. The story of Reuben and Bilha is one of these. In the printed Hebrew version, there is a curious gap in the middle of the verse, situated between the phrases, "and Israel heard," and "there will be 12 sons of Jacob." In ancient texts, gaps were employed as a form of punctuation. The tradition of inserting what is known as a paragraph within a verse is relatively uncommon. One explanation for this practice is that it serves as a marker, drawing the reader's attention to another section of the Bible that is related to the marked text. In the Book of Chronicles, it is clarified that Reuben lost his status as the firstborn due to his actions, and the birthright was subsequently passed on to the sons of Jacob's firstborn, Rachel's son, Joseph. He was the firstborn, but when he defiled his father's marriage bed, his rights as firstborn were given to the sons of Joseph son of Israel, so he could not be listed in the genealogical record in accordance with his birthright, and though Judah was the strongest of his brothers and a ruler came from him, the rights of the firstborn belonged to Joseph. 1 Chronicles 5 verse 1. Joseph's birthright expression means that his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, were considered tribes among the people of Israel. As a result, they each inherited separate portions of land, effectively doubling Joseph's share of the inheritance. Even though Reuben made a mistake in his behavior and lost his birthright, the conclusion of the events described states, Jacob had 12 sons. Whether the long-standing tradition among writers of this verse intended it or not, it's clear that the author of 1 Chronicles is referring to the event described in Genesis 35. The phrase, "but when he defiled his father's marriage bed," refers to Reuben sleeping with Bilha, his father's concubine. This very sentence shows how the biblical writers relied on previous biblical texts and traditions, offering a glimpse into the process of composing biblical texts. The author of Chronicles does not use the same language as the author of Genesis. Instead, he borrows a phrase from Jacob's farewell speech to his sons found in Genesis 49 verse 28. In Genesis chapter 49, which is known as blessing of Jacob, some of Jacob's words might sound more like curses. Before Jacob passes away, he gathers his sons to bid them farewell. He describes each of his sons based on their character and individuality. He gives blessings to each son, not just as a way of saying, "Keep being who you are," but even in his final moments, he remains an educator father, a guide on their life journeys. But he has some stern words for Reuben. Jacob says to Reuben, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." Genesis 49 verses 3-4. Because of your careless actions, you lost the privileges you rightfully deserved. You rushed onto my bed, and in doing so, you disrespected my honor. Reuben, as the eldest, had 3 birthright privileges stripped away due to his actions. The priesthood. Originally, the right to become a priest among the people of Israel belonged to the firstborn. However, this right was later transferred to the tribe of Levi following Reuben's act. The kingdom. The tribe of Judah is the ruling tribe among the people of Israel. But because Reuben was the firstborn, it was appropriate for the tribe of Reuben to be in the kingship over Israel. He lost this right as a result of his act. A double share in the inheritance. The right to a double share in the inheritance was initially with Reuben, but it was passed on to Joseph. Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and each of them is considered a tribe on its own. Therefore, Joseph's portion in the division of the land among the tribes of Israel is twice as much as that of his other brothers. This reading of Jacob's blessing helps fill in some gaps in the story of Reuben and Bilha. Firstly, the Bible tells us that Jacob learned about what Reuben had done, and that's all we know. But in Genesis 49, as the author of Chronicler explains, Jacob addresses this old issue by not giving Reuben the privileges that typically belong to a firstborn son. Throughout the stories of three fathers, we see a repeating pattern. It's not always the firstborn who carries on the family legacy. For instance, it was the younger Isaac, not the firstborn Ishmael, who succeeded Abraham. Similarly, Jacob, the younger twin, not the firstborn Esau, became the successor to Isaac. Even among Jacob's own sons, it's not Reuben, the firstborn, who emerges as the leader, but Judah, the fourth son. And in the case of Joseph's sons, leadership falls to Ephraim, the younger, rather than Manasseh, the elder. The message here is clear. Leadership isn't determined solely by birthright or the way of nature. Instead, it's often those who prove themselves worthy who are chosen for leadership roles. We hope you learned something new today. If you did, give this video a like and share it with your friends. You can share with us what you know by leaving a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative and entertaining content. Thank you so much and see you next time.